Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Ben here, and today I'm coming at you with a video that is surrounded around Kyle Korver. If you're not familiar with Kyle Korver, he plays for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's a former NBA All-Star. He has one of the greatest three-point shots of all time. For his career, he is shooting 43% from three-point land. He's led the NBA in three-point shooting many different seasons. I think it's around 4 or 5. He had one season where he shot nearly 50%. Looking at his stats, it was .498, which is almost about as close as you could get without shooting 50% from three. He's a true marksman, and the reason I'm talking about him today is because news is broke that Cleveland is interested in trading him. He's pretty old. He's in his later 30s, and he's still got that stroke, though, and he'd be very valuable to, I think, a lot of different NBA teams. So today I'm just going to run through some potential trade scenarios for Kyle Korver. I've laid out 5 different teams that he could potentially go to, and let's get into it. So in the criteria I looked at for figuring out trades for Kyle Korver, I basically just looked at teams that I thought would need some shooting help and could really use that type of player. So the first team I have, I think it may be sort of an obvious one, but it's the Los Angeles Lakers. Kyle Korver reuniting with LeBron. As we all know, one of LeBron's major types of players that he loves to play with are guys that can just catch and shoot and are really good from three-point range. In the Cleveland, the first time it was Mel Williams and Anthony Parker, and in Miami it was a ton of guys like Bosh and Ray Allen and Shane Battier and Mario Chalmers. And then in Cleveland the second time, it was basically Kyle Korver was the main guy for that, along with Kevin Love. And so I think Kyle Korver makes sense going to the Lakers. They would have to, for this trade, they would have to wait till a little while longer because of how recent contract signings work. You can't trade certain players until they've played a certain amount of time for your team. But the trade I would do is Kyle Korver to the Lakers for Rajon Rondo. I really think that with Lonzo and Rondo, you kind of have a repeat of the same mold of player, and you don't really need both guys. You could just get along with one. Neither of them has a great three-point shot, but they both specialize in passing and working without the ball in their hands because they want to distribute so much. But really, they're just a duplicate of one another, and with LeBron already on the roster being essentially the point guard, you don't need 3 guys that need the ball in their hands, so this would eliminate one of those guys. You get Korver into Los Angeles, who is a good shooter and can help space the floor, and is basically Josh Hart's better than Kyle Korver right now, but Kyle Korver in his prime is what Josh Hart, I think, aspires to be, and so he could sort of help him develop a little bit and at the same time provide a good veteran presence in the locker room. And on Cleveland's side, you get Rondo back, who I don't expect to do much besides maybe back up Colin Sexton. But he's on a 1-year deal for $9 million, so he's an expiring contract. After this year, you can get him out of there. Whereas Korver has 2 years left on his deal, so you'd be freeing up $9 million a year sooner if you're Cleveland, which I think a lot of teams that are rebuilding, such as I think Cleveland is, they like having more cap space sooner. So they would be incentivized to make this trade based on that. And again, the Lakers get better spacing, and you could have a little more flexibility with your lineups because now you don't have to play Rondo and Lonzo potentially at the same time. You could run lineups with Korver at the shooting guard or the small forward, and you could potentially have a lineup that looks something like LeBron, let's say, at the small ball 5 with Kuzma at the 4, and then you could have Hart and Korver and Lonzo, and then that could be your 5. Or you could do another thing where you go small ball. You have LeBron at the 1, and you have Hart at the 2, Korver at the 3, and then Ingram and Kuzma playing the 4 and the 5. That would be a really small ball lineup, but you could do it. It'd be fine. And then you'd have a lot more shooting on the court for LeBron to distribute to and do kind of what the Bucks are doing, like a 4 out, 1 in type of scheme where you have one guy that penetrates or plays on the inside, which for the Lakers would be LeBron, and then you'd have 4 guys on the wing ready to shoot. So that's the first scenario to the Lakers, which I think makes sense considering LeBron's there and how he likes to play. The next scenario I have is Kyle Korver going to the New Orleans Pelicans. This one I think would be the hardest to sell to the Cavaliers just because I think they're getting honestly nothing of value in return. I have Kyle Korver going to New Orleans for Solomon Hill. If you don't know, Solomon Hill is a small forward / power forward in the NBA. He's not a great player. He's really the definition of backup average. He is like an okay shot, not great. He isn't really playing much for New Orleans this year. But the reason I have him in the trade is because their salaries match up. And now this is the opposite of the Rondo reason. With Solomon Hill, his contract lasts just as long as Korver's, but it's for $12 million. So when he gets off the books, instead of freeing up 7 like you would be with Korver, you'd be freeing up 12, which makes it a little bit better. They'd be getting $12 million in free cap instead of 7, which is a small incentive, but might be enough for them. And also, if the Cavaliers aren't wanting to make this trade, New Orleans could always throw in like a second-round pick, or even depending on how much they think they need shooting, a first-round pick. I like this a lot for New Orleans in that they get Kyle Korver in there, who really fills a need that they have at shooting guard. Yes, they have E'Twaun Moore, but I've never been completely sold on him. I think he's really best as like a 7th man, but they've been using him as a starter for this year and last year. I like a lineup where you could have, let's say, Drew Holiday at the point with Kyle Korver at the 2, and then Mirotic, Davis, and Julius Randle. I like that as a starting lineup a lot, or just a primary lineup to use. Or if they want more shooting, they can take Randle out, put Davis at the 5, Mirotic at the 4, Korver or E'Twaun Moore at the 3, depending on who wants to guard the small forward, and the other guy at the 2 with Holiday at the 1. That's just what I'd do. I think they'd have a ton of spacing then, and it would really improve the team. And down the stretch of games, that I think having Korver to shoot shots and create space would be really valuable to allow Davis to just bang on the inside and allow more lanes for Drew Holiday to slash, because he's not a great shooter. He likes to get to the rim, I think, more often and play in the mid-range a little bit too, so that creates more space within the arc for Drew Holiday to do his offense. So that's another trade that I think would be beneficial to a team that's a playoff contender, and it's not going to get them over the hump, but it could definitely be the difference between being like a 6 seed and maybe a 5 seed, or a 5 seed and a 4 seed. So that I think that would be a good trade for New Orleans. So looking forward to another trade, I have the next team on here being the Philadelphia 76ers. This is a team that really needs some shooting help, I think. They lost Marco Bellinelli and Ersan Ilyasova from last year, who were very integral to their team succeeding and going on that 16-game win streak. They provided a ton of spacing for Ben Simmons, who always is desperately in need of spacing because of his lack of an outside shot. And with Embiid, who is also a guy that likes to play on the inside, it's beneficial to have a lot of shooters surrounding him. So I like acquiring Korver. You could have, in return, the Cavaliers getting Jared Bayless. This would sort of be like the Rondo scenario in that Jared Bayless makes around the same money. He makes $8.5 million, and his contract is expiring this year, so Cleveland would get that expiring money 1 year earlier. He's not good enough that he's going to prevent them from tanking. They probably wouldn't even play him, so they can still continue with their tank, but just get money a year earlier. So I think that provides some incentive to them. As far as Philadelphia, they just get another like a 6th or 7th man in Kyle Korver to basically just fill the role that Marco Bellinelli was filling last year, and just be a good contributor on the second unit and maybe give them 10 points a game. I think that would be a great addition for Philadelphia and could help them build on what they were getting at last year with their spacing and what Bellinelli was bringing to the team. I think that's the trade that probably benefits a team the most, in that Philadelphia, I think, is struggling without that additional spacing. Markelle Fultz isn't really providing that for them. He's supposed to be like their kind of their answer to losing Bellinelli and Ilyasova, but he's not a shooter, so that doesn't really address the issue. But I think acquiring Korver would really be a great improvement for that team. Next, this is potentially the most far-fetched one, and the one I would say is least likely to happen. But here's the trade. Kyle Korver and Sam Dekker to the Minnesota Timberwolves in exchange for Gorgui Dieng. Now, this is the hardest one because I don't think that Cleveland would really have any incentive to make the trade because Gorgui has a 3-year deal worth $15.7 or $15.1 million, and they already have Tristan Thompson on the team, so it doesn't really make sense to acquire Gorgui Dieng as well. But if Minnesota threw in a first-round pick, yeah, I could see this happening. I think that they would have to give him a first-round pick. This trade is actually really good for Minnesota. They get out from under that $15 million. And as far as the players they're getting back, Sam Decker's okay. He's making $3 million a year. He's on an expiring deal, so they could get rid of him and free up $3 million in cap space. And then as far as Korver, he addresses a major shooting need that the team has. They don't have much spacing, but he, I think, improves the team a lot in that respect. They could then run a lineup of well, I guess he would just come off the bench and sub in for Wiggins or Butler, but he would, instead of subbing in Derrick Rose off the bench, who isn't as great of a shooter, if they needed a spacing lineup, they could bring in Korver. And for a team that at times has a really bad spacing lineup, which would consist of like Derrick Rose, Jimmy Butler, Wiggins, Taj Gibson, and Cat, in that lineup, you really only have like one pretty good shooter in Cat. But if you sub in Korver, your best shooting lineup can look like Jeff Teague, Kyle Korver, Jimmy Butler, Anthony Tolliver, and Karl Anthony Towns. In that lineup, the worst shooter is like Jeff Teague, who's still like a 35%-ish shooter from 3. So that's a pretty good lineup for shooting then, if you look at that. And Korver really helps with that. And again, they cut off a little bit of their cap hit because Gorgui's making so much money. So this one's the hardest to sell for Cleveland, but they are getting a really good starting caliber or backup center in Gorgui Dieng, depending on how they would want to use him. And maybe this would have to work in a 3-way deal where they get rid of Kevin Love too, because then they would have a need at power forward that they could slot Dieng into, or move Tristan to the 4 and have Gorgui at the 5. But I think if Minnesota threw in a first-round pick and Gorgui, they could get this deal done. Because it's not like Cleveland's giving up that much value either. So that's a way to look at it. But this one is the least likely to get done, I would say. My last one is a pretty simple one. It's Kyle Korver to the Pistons in exchange for Langston Galloway. Langston Galloway has essentially the same contract as Korver, making the same amount of money for the same amount of years. I think he would just be essentially filling up cap space for them. I don't think he'd really play much, or maybe he would play a little, but he wouldn't be that impactful. He's averaging 5 points a game this year, which really doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't do much for any team. They could easily just sit him out if he was on Cleveland. Maybe that Detroit would have to throw in like a second-round pick to give a little more incentive to Cleveland to do this deal, but I think that Cleveland would definitely do it if they threw in a second-round pick. They give up Korver to Detroit, who provides some good shooting. This team's desperately in need of just a shooting guard, really. They don't have much as far as a shooting guard. Langston Galloway is basically their guy, and he's playing 22 minutes a night and not playing that great. But Korver could slot in for like 28 minutes a night, I think, give them 10 to 12 points, and just create some spacing, because between Drummond and Reggie Jackson in the starting lineup, and then Blake's like an okay shooter, but not great, and John Lure has been declining a little bit as far as his shot, so Korver would be like a nice injection of shooting into that lineup, space the floor a little bit to create some more space in the paint for Reggie Jackson to drive. And it would improve them a little bit. It wouldn't put them over the top or anything, but it would just help them and could maybe solidify them as a playoff team. There you have it, guys. Those are my 5 trade scenarios I have for Kyle Korver. I think he's a valuable player that could do good things on a number of teams and help a number of teams improve. And he's not going to put anyone over the top, but he can definitely be a contributor and help, and can really improve a given lineup. Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any comments, leave them below. I'd love to hear from you, and hope you all have a good day. Bye.